The well-meaning parent might start to try and change their kids' eating. And there's nothing wrong with preparing healthy meals and all that stuff. But once you start getting really restrictive and saying, oh, you can't eat that, there's no sugar in this household, that's the kid that ends up sneaking food and feeling a lot of guilt because they usually follow through with what their parents are saying. And it creates all of these problems and these obsessions around eating.
You're listening to the Mindful Mama podcast, episode number 224. Today, we're talking about the anti-diet with Evelyn Tribole. Welcome to the Mindful Mama podcast. Here, it's about becoming a less irritable, more joyful parent. At Mindful Mama, we know that you cannot give what you do not have. And when you have calm and peace within, then you can give it to your children. I'm your host, Hunter Clark-Field's Mindful Mama mentor. I help smart, thoughtful parents stay calm so they can have strong, connected relationships with their children. I've been practicing mindfulness for over 20 years. I'm the creator of the Mindful Parenting Membership, and I'm the author of Raising Good Humans, a mindful guide to breaking the cycle of reactive parenting and raising kind, confident kids. Thank you so much for being here. I am so glad to connect with you again, dear listener. In just a moment, I am going to be talking to the amazing Evelyn Tribole. She's an MS and RD and an award-winning registered dietitian with a nutrition counseling practice in Newport Beach, California. But you may know her because she is the co-author of the amazing bestseller, Intuitive Eating. And she's also written 9 books, including Healthy Homestyle Cooking and Intuitive Eating. So we are going to talk about eating today. And this is interesting because a lot of us, so many of us, oh my goodness, struggle with what we eat or what our kids eat. And we may not even realize how our culture has made eating into an issue or carbs into the enemy. And it really reaches down to our kids. It can hurt their relationship with food, sometimes for life. So I talk with Evelyn about how do we avoid the pitfalls of the dieting culture. And I want you to listen for some important things, how we as parents can help kids to trust their bodies, how dieting is the best predictor of gaining more weight, and how dieting culture hurts kids. And that culture can be found in our homes and in our schools. It's a mess. So I can't wait for you to dive into this episode. I also want to let you know that soon I'm going to be opening up my powerful group coaching program, the Mindful Mama Transformation Coaching Group. And if you are interested in this transformative 5-month small group, highly personalized experience, I'd love for you to email me at hunter@mindfulmamamentor.com to learn more, and I'll help you get on the wait list, or maybe I'll just hop on the phone and talk to you about it. All right. I know you want to hear Evelyn, so let's dive into this episode. Evelyn, thanks so much for coming on the Mindful Mama podcast.
Oh, I'm so thrilled to be here. You have no idea. So, yeah.
Good. And as I told you, I am so, and my friends are so excited for me to be talking to you. You are held in very high esteem in my neighborhood.
That's awesome. I want to visit your neighborhood then when it's safe. Do that.
Yes, come along in better times to the Ardens. So you are, as I've already introduced you, you're the author of Intuitive Eating, and this is your life's work. Do this incredible work. And I just want to know, before we dive into intuitive eating, there's so much I want to dive into here, but what got you passionate about this? What got you interested in helping people transform their eating habits?
I will tell you, and I also want to just make sure to know that not only is it my life's work, it's Elise Rush's life work. She's a co-author on this. And so it was 25 years ago that our first book was published. And what was happening is we were simultaneously going through the same frustration, that we were putting our patients on these beautifully dietitian approved diet quote lifestyles, and it wasn't working. They would temporarily lose the weight, and then they'd come back in, weight came back on, and they're blaming themselves. And it's like, you know what, this isn't working. This doesn't feel good. And we were going through this place of cognitive dissonance. And I see this happening with a lot of health professionals as they start to embrace our work, and also with the patients that I currently work with. It's like, is there really a different way? And the answer is yes. So what we did is we went into the research to see how could we define a better way of eating and connecting with ourselves, and also what's going on in the in the consumer world. And so putting that all together, combined with our own experiences, we came up with these 10 principles. And we actually got really lucky because it was originally just a book. And our publisher said, we'd like you to turn this into steps or more how to. And that's how it turned into 10 principles as opposed to just 10 chapters in a book. And the beauty of that, and the luck that we didn't know we had, is a researcher read our book, and it was very meaningful to her because her, I'm not going to go into her personal story, but she thought, this has some merit. I want to see, can we identify who the intuitive eater is, and does it make a difference in someone's quality of life and their outcomes? The answer was yes, yes, and yes. And that researcher is Tracy Tilka, and she's gone on to validate this assessment. And what's so important and significant about this is it's allowed research to flourish. So when we first published our book and our idea, we can say it was research inspired, but now we can say there's over 125 studies on our work showing benefits. So part of, I would say, to answer your question more directly, our big reason for doing this, the way I describe it now, is to put an end to unnecessary suffering, because people would start to get anxious just thinking about what to eat, how to eat, and about their bodies and all these things. And what's happened now, because in 25 years, a lot has changed. There's more research now on weight stigma and fat phobia. We now have the health at every size movement that is really also gaining traction. And so we just know there's a better way to be in relationship with our bodies. We're humans, Humans come in different sizes, just like shoe sizes. And with my younger patients, actually some of my older patients too, I'll say we're all like puppies. There's little tiny chihuahuas, and no one's saying that there's anything wrong with or better about a chihuahua versus a big bulldog mass dog. We're not saying, hey, bulldog, you gotta be like a chihuahua. You gotta change your size, or you don't have the dignity to exist in the puppy kingdom. And it sounds a little silly when I say it that way, but when you look at all different types of animals and whatnot, there is diversity, so that's part of our message also. And that's how this book has really been updated. We talk about weight stigma, we talk about diet culture and these things that are influencing us. And I'll tell you, the thing that breaks my heart, working with parents and the kids, is how diet culture is in our school. How, one of the things that just strikes me is this comes from I have a pretty active Instagram account, and there was a mom describing how she gave her little boy, a kindergartner, packed a homemade cookie in his lunch, and the teacher said, oh, this is bad. And now he's afraid to eat cookies and what his mom sent him to school. And that's diet culture, and there's no place for that in here, So that's why we're out to change the world. I'm actually out to make a difference in that way. There's another way to relate with our food,
I think you are. Is it something that it was something that was something personal for you? I mean, did you go into becoming, I guess, a dietitian and that stuff because you had personally struggled with it?
My story is very unusual. I'll tell you the backstory of it. My interest in nutrition grew because I was a runner at a time when there weren't girls' track teams, not very commonly. So I ran on the boys' track team, and I was out to beat the boys. And
nice.
I was fascinated. What can I eat to beat the boys? And at that time, I didn't get that much nutrition information. The internet did not exist back then. That's how old school this was. And so I got into this idea of eating for performance. I got into a lot of fad eating as a result of it, And nutrition wasn't even my first major. My first major was physical education. I wanted to be a coach. And because of public funding at the time, it became very clear I was not going to get a job. So I saw this nutrition book in the Student University Center, and I waited for the student. We were at a cafeteria, and the student came back, was the owner of the book, and I asked her about nutrition, and she happened to be president of the Student Dietetic Association. So I went to one of their meetings, took a class, and fell in love with the field. So so the part that's unusual is performance. The other part that's really unusual, I think this is hilarious when I look back on it. I have always viewed my body as a function. As opposed to appearance. And there's a really great mantra by a group of two researchers they run this organization called Beauty Redefined. And they say, our body is an instrument, not an ornament. And so when I was in high school, just about every Friday at the end of track, the boys and I, we'd sit in a circle with our feet pointing inward, kind of like a big old daisy flower, and we would look and compare who's got the most veins, because it was a sign of vascularization that we're getting fit. So you can see I came into this with a completely different mindset, and yet at the same time, I grew up with a dieting mom. And I will tell you, I'm really lucky she didn't project that onto me, but sadly, she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer and died of ovarian cancer 3 years from her diagnosis. And I will never forget her saying, wow, all these years spent dieting, what a waste, you know? And that was just a profound, sad moment. So I've had personal experiences with diet culture, but I'm lucky to some degree I escaped it, but I was definitely affected by it, you know?
Oh, wow. Wow. I mean, and you talk about diet culture, and I think, the listener, oddly
Okay.
enough, there's a bumblebee under my foot.
Ooh,
Everybody,
do you need
there's
to pause?
strange things happening. No, we're going to just keep this in, keep it real. Like,
Okay, hello, Mr. B.
here in the podcast today. We can all agree that diet culture sounds unhealthy. Like diet culture sounds like something that might be punishing and restrictive and not so healthy. And I think today we talk a lot about wellness. We talk about like really healthy eating and eating for fuel and things like that. And that all feels a lot more wholesome. But I think that you have some issues with that too. Are there some ways that some of the same issues have kind of been pervasive in our new sort of culture of like really, I'm picturing, a lot, I know a lot of my listeners are pretty crunchy moms and they're really interested in whole foods and not a lot of grains and all those things. So tell me a little bit more about diet culture and what it's kind of morphed into now, and what are the healthy ways of looking at this versus the unhealthy. Is there an unhealthy side to some of
Yeah,
that?
I have many ways that I look at this. And, it's so interesting. Last year, there was a New York Times op-ed piece that went viral. And it was about this very thing, the question that you're asking, that I'm laughing because I'm seeing you trying and get the beat out. And this is a serious topic, I realize.
Pushing him away.
Okay. So what this viral op-ed piece talked about is how diet culture has now changed the language. It's gotten very smart like a virus. So now instead of saying diet, they'll say things like wellness and living your best life and keto lifestyle and things like this. And here's what's problematic about this. And by the way, let me be really clear before we go down this line of discussion, that what I'm about to say is directed toward the perpetrators of this, the industries of this that are making money and saying things that just really aren't true. And because of diet culture, a lot of people think that in order to be healthy, they need to change the size of their body, So this is not to shame anyone who has those desires or engaged in those things. And I've worked with a lot of families. I've never met a parent yet who doesn't have really good intentions with their family. So as I'm about to describe some of these things, it's not to cast shame, but it's to start looking at, is the way that I'm going about this in my family, am I helping the health of my family, or might I be contributing to a problem? And again, it's not to blame the parents. And so what we have to remember, we have to step back and say, what is health to begin with? And health is more than what we eat. Health includes our mental health, our psychological health, our social health, our spiritual health, all those kinds of things. And they're very, very significant. And so where this has really gotten muddled is there's this idea out there that health is reflected by the size of your body. And often when I have these conversations with someone, if they're hearing this for the first time, they think like I'm a heretic. I'm like, what are you talking about? And then as I start breaking down, there is a body of research showing this, that one, dieting in of itself, by whatever name you want to call it, but especially if we're talking about any way of eating for the purpose of shrinking your body, it actually is the best predictor of gaining more weight. Study after study has shown this over and over and over again. That's number one. So it's not effective. It actually seems to be causing the very opposite of what you're trying to do. But what's really important is that it contributes to weight stigma, this idea that your body is your fault if it's a certain size or not a certain size. It also contributes to weight cycling. Weight cycling is when someone keeps gaining and losing weight, and weight cycling has its own health outcomes that are negative. The same thing with weight stigma. And then when we start looking at the research about the risk of dieting and what that does for increasing risk of eating disorders, it's very clear. And what's really scary to me is that eating disorders have doubled in the last time period in which they have looked at. And that's a shocking figure. And part of the reason I think we're seeing such an escalation in eating disorders is that diet culture has been normalized. Skipping eating has become normalized. Eating disorder behaviors have become normalized because of our culture. And the way that I see this play out, most people start off with really good intentions. They'll say, I just want to be healthy. Nothing wrong with wanting to be healthy. But when you start going down this path in such a way in which it causes you to worry all the time about your body. You're worried all the time about the foods that you're eating in your body. Is this a good food? Is this a bad food? Where food itself has inherently no morality, but it's perceived that way. What it ends up doing, it takes you out of your own life. It takes you out of the present moment, And so you're going out to, let's say, lunch with a bunch of other moms. And instead of being excited about connecting with the moms, you're worried about, oh my gosh, what am I going to eat? Is this going to blow my diet? What's this going to do to my body? So that's how this ends up causing a lot of problem. And when I have sessions with patients, where I see this play out in families, if mom or dad is dieting, it's common that both of them are. I'll say, one of the signs when you're not getting enough to eat is you get a little cranky. We heard the word hangry, and you might find yourself yelling at your kids, and that's not aligned with your family values and how you want to raise your kid, but your patience gets so short. And looking at those kinds of aspects, or now you see your little 5-year-old worrying about their body, that breaks my heart. So
Yeah.
So that's the issue with this whole wellness culture. It sounds nice, but what it is the dieting industry is morphing itself to sound politically correct. Weight Watchers changed its name to WW because they want to get away from the idea of dieting, but it's still a diet.
Stay tuned for more Mindful Mama podcast right after this break. We are supported by the Grassroots Farmers Cooperative. We're all doing our best to slow down and reconnect to ourselves, our communities, and the planet. And we know how important it is to be intentional with what we feed our bodies and to make sure that it's friendly to the planet, which is why I source my meat from Grassroots Farmers Cooperative. Grassroots Farmers Cooperative has this commitment to nutritious meals, and they know that it starts with the practice of regenerative agriculture, which means that more nutrients are in the plants that are eaten by the animals. And all of their animals are 100% pasture-raised, roaming free on U.S.-based small-scale family farms. And the end result is tastier meat with higher levels of omegas, vitamins, and minerals. It's amazing. They are committed to transparency, and they even have QR codes that on each piece of meat that let me trace the meat back to its original farm for that total transparency, delivered straight to my door, no trips to the store, which is impossible right now, frankly. Grassroots Farmers Cooperative is also committed to paying their workers a livable wage so they can focus on maintaining the highest standards from pasture to plate. Order Grassroots Co-op today to get high-quality, nutrient-rich meat delivered straight to your door. No subscription required. Right now, they're giving our listeners a special limited-time offer. $40 off plus free shipping. Go to grassrootscoop.com/hunter to get the full details and order today. Go now. That's grassrootscoop.com/HUNTER. Is it true though that they're being very overweight is pretty unhealthy though, right? Like we know that it's associated with a bunch of problems as far as health problems and things like that. So, I mean, imagine there are like important times when one wants to lose weight. Actually, I had a client who was talking to me about this. She was saying that she wanted to lose weight because she wants to be able to have a surgery for something in her stomach, like, and she has to lose weight to be able to have the surgery or something like that. And it was something the surgery was something unrelated to weight, but she had to be able to do it anyway. But just to play the devil's advocate to what you're saying, like, isn't it unhealthy to be pretty obese?
Well, see, and that's the dominant belief in the culture right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're asking a very good question. I get this asked all the time, even when I present all the data, and you used a very important word, and you said association. It is true that higher weight bodies, there's associations with some chronic diseases. But it's also true that the studies that look at all of this, they don't account for very important factors, also known as confounders. Like if someone has a history of childhood trauma, this is really sad. There's a thing called ACEs, adverse childhood experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And if a child has been exposed, and there's 10 of them that they identify, and if a child has been exposed, now you're an adult, but you were exposed as a child to 6 or more, that cuts off your life expectancy by 20 years. So instead of living to 80, you live to 60. That increases your risk of chronic diseases, including depression. I have not seen a study yet that when they're looking at risk and weight, that they actually look at these ACEs, at the adverse childhood experiences. That's one example. There was one really, really good study looking at the problem of isolation and quality of relationships. And this researcher, who's a psychologist, said, this is our public health issue. And so they took all the research on that and lined it up with these other things like cigarette smoking and weight. And I forget, there's about 10 other things. And weight ended up being very, very low in terms of risk of mortality and morbidity when you factor in all these other things. And so that's the part that I think a lot of people have a hard time wrapping their mind around, because we've been taught this. I was taught this in grad school. In fact, a lot of the health professionals I teach will say, why did I learn this in the university? Why did I learn this in my internship? And sometimes I say, why weren't you asking questions? But the truth is, when you're a student, you don't know to ask these kinds of questions. The data are out there. And so what happens is, this type of research has a name. It's called epidemiological research. That shows association. And what it tends to do is, all it does is kind of reify a belief system. So let me give you an example, the way I like to break it down with my patients. It is true that in the summertime, there are more drownings from people swimming. That's true. It is also true that in the summertime, people eat more ice cream. It is also true, we can say, that eating ice cream is associated with drownings. And no one is saying that eating ice cream causes drowning. In fact, when I talk about that, people laugh like, oh, that's so silly. It's like, yeah, it is, huh? And yet, if we instead use the word weight, all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, that's true. So it's an association, not a causation. And so it's also very political. Back in 2013, the American Medical Association asked their research committee this question: can we say that being in a higher weight is a disease? So-called obesity, is that a disease? And the researchers looked and looked and looked at all the data, and they said, we don't have enough research to suggest that. And the AMA, the American Medical Association, said, we don't like that. We're going to take it to a vote. And they outvoted the research committee, And so what's happening now that I find is really making this challenging. Before, diet culture was just like the weight loss industry and the fitness industry and the beauty industry. But now there's health professionals that are also promoting it. And then I'll have a patient come in and they'll say, but my doctor or my healthcare provider or my other dietitian. And so now they're feeling, like what is true. And that's why I say we need to look at all the research and what is true. And so that's when I sometimes will talk about a phenomenon called the Semmelweis reflex. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. It was newer to me. I learned it from another physician. And so it's interesting that we're talking about this right now in the time of Corona. So the Semmelweis reflex is named after a doctor who discovered that if you wash your hands, it can save lives. And women were dying in childbirth. And he was observing this because at that time, doctors would go from doing autopsies on obviously dead bodies and then giving birth and women would die. He saw this connection, did a small study with hand washing, and changed the outcomes dramatically. This was back in the 1600s before they discovered germs cause death and germs cause illness. So he wrote papers on it, he lectured about it, and he was laughed out of medicine. He was literally laughed out of medicine, and they were saying, oh, it's ridiculous. Don't be absurd. We're gentlemen. We don't kill our patients. We're gentlemen. We don't need to wash our hands. That is what was ended up happening. And so it was a few decades later that Louis Pasteur came out with germ theory. And so now the Semmelweis reflex is named after him, that when new research comes out that challenges the dominant belief system or the dominant paradigm, it's met with a lot of resistance and even ridicule. And probably our most recent example of that was in the 80s, when up until the 80s, if someone had an ulcer, they thought, oh, you caused it. It's your lifestyle, it's what you're eating. And the two physicians, scientists, discovered that no, it's a bacteria that does it. They found what it was, H.Y. pylori, and the elite doctors at the time also thought that was really ridiculous. And they would publish some research, but it was drowned out by the body of research looking at doing surgeries for bleeding ulcers and all these other kinds of things, or taking antacids. And finally, when one of the doctors actually isolated that bacteria and swallowed it himself and gave himself a disease and then cured it. I know, right? Gosh. That's how much resistance he was met by. And then they ended up getting, I think it was in 2005, the Nobel Prize Award in medicine for discovering this. It's completely changed medicine. Patients used to get their part of their stomachs cut off for part of this, or told, oh, you got to change your lifestyle. You got to eat a bland diet. So, we have seen this happen. I think that's what we're seeing right now. And then, so that's from a medical scientific standpoint. If we start taking a look at a societal aspect, there's a really good book, and it's disturbing to read, and it's called Fearing the Black Body, The Racial Roots of Fat Phobia. And it's written by an academic out of UCI, University of Irvine in California. And what she systematically shows is, starting around the 1500s, that this is really the byproduct of racism and patriarchy and some forms of religion in terms of how people should be living. This is before there was any health connection, that this was a belief that is systematically been handed down through the culture. And it's so when you combine all of this, it's why we're kind of in the mess that we're in today,
Wow.
I know, so right?
There's a lot there. I might have to re-listen back to what you said to take it all in. I mean, that is a lot there. And then there is, I know the concept of health at any size and all that stuff. And I absolutely believe that people can be healthy at all kinds of different sizes, be really active and things like that. But then part of me worries about that. Actually my husband worries about that. Like, we have a daughter who's he has had issues after having he had appendicitis and liquid IV for many days, and since then he's had a lot of digestive issues. He can't digest things, and so we've been in a thing to try to figure out. And he can't eat gluten anymore. He can't. It really makes it throws his system for a loop, and he can't. But he's become very sensitive and aware of the rest of us eating gluten in the house. We like our bread. We're happy with it. But he's a little worried about, if one daughter is, just as she's changing, just, maybe, getting a little chubbier than she was at her young age, and seeing the connection with maybe eating bagels and whatever, and is worried about that, and is wondering, and I'm kind of saying, well, I don't know. I think we both see that he's very sensitive to that. He's really aware of that. He's really sensitive to that. So just wondering if you think about a situation like that, and knowing that we all are in the soup of this culture that is, as you just described, how would you say are some ways we can start to approach the situation in a healthier manner and way of thinking and mindset? Stay tuned for more Mindful Mama podcast right after this break. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. There's so much anxiety right now, and we all need someone to talk to. And I can imagine for most of us right now, there's something interfering with our happiness and preventing us from achieving our goals. BetterHelp will assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist. You can start communication in under 24 hours. It's not a crisis line, it's not self-help, it's professional counseling done securely online. There is a broad range of expertise available, which may not be locally available in many areas, and it's available for clients worldwide. You can log into your account at any time and send a message to your counselor. You'll get timely and thoughtful responses, plus you can schedule weekly video or phone sessions, and you don't ever have to sit in that in-person traditional therapy waiting room. BetterHelp is committed to facilitating great therapeutic matches, so they make it easy and free to change counselors if needed. It's more affordable than traditional offline counseling, and financial aid is available. BetterHelp wants you to start living a happier life today. Visit their website and read their testimonials that are posted daily. I popped over and read this one recently. Connie is wonderful. I felt comfortable opening up to her, and she is very insightful. Our sessions have really helped. Visit betterhelp.com/hunter. That's better, H-E-L-P, and join the over 800,000 people taking charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced professional. Special offer for Mindful Mama podcast listeners to get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/hunter.
Yeah, I want to answer that, but I want to go back and reframe something you said because it's significant, subtle distinction. So health at every size, not healthy at every size. And what health at every size is actually a social justice movement saying regardless of the size of your body, regardless of the color of your skin, your gender race, is you should be able to have access to healthcare. That sounds like basic. I haven't had anyone disagree with me with that. But what the problem is because there's so much prejudice going on now about bodies. There's been some really sad people get diagnosed. Some large body, if they sprain their ankle and go into the doctor, they want to be able to get out like an X-ray, or if it turns out it's a broken ankle, they want to get the cast and not just have a doctor say, you just need to lose weight and your ankle will feel better. I cannot tell you how many stories I've had with this, and there's sadly even a patient that died from misdiagnosis. She was in a large body, feeling really awful. This is out of Canada. In fact, we wrote up her story in our forthcoming book. And she finally, after several years, went to a doctor who did a proper evaluation and medical workup and just didn't say lose weight. That's what the other doctors told her. It turned out she had a form of cancer that was not treatable in the stage it was in, and she died days later. And it was in her obituary. She didn't want anyone else to suffer this fate, which is why she talked about this. And I thought, you know what, we're going to use that in our book as an example. And this is not about pointing fingers at any doc. I know a lot of really, really good doctors, but this weight stigma and this bias is really problematic. And so back to your question then, what do we do? Well, we need to change the culture. Sometimes what's going on, the parents will say, I'm worried about my kid's weight. But when we start saying your child is wrong because of the size of the body. Now, I've never met a parent that actually has ever said that directly, but that's the message they get and they internalize it. And so then the well-meaning parent might start to try and change their kids' eating. And there's nothing wrong with preparing healthy meals and all that stuff. But once you start getting really restrictive and saying, you can't eat that, there's no sugar in this household, that's the kid that ends up sneaking food and feeling a lot of guilt because they usually follow through with what their parents are saying. And it creates all of these problems and these obsessions around eating, and I can't tell you how often I've seen that. So instead, what we want to talk about, and by the way, we can pursue health without pursuing changing our body size. We can engage in healthy behaviors that are sustainable. That's awesome. Nothing wrong with that. That's not going to cause harm. Yeah, we can move our body and have more activity. We can add, more fruits and vegetables. Those things are totally fine. But the moment the agenda is we need to change the size of your body, that becomes problematic. And again, we have this body of research showing that it's not sustainable. There's not a single study yet that shows it's sustainable for a long term. And if there's listeners out there saying, oh yeah, but there's this study, we have to look at how long were these studies done. Most of them are short term. And we need these studies to be at minimum 2 years. 5 years is actually the better mark to actually see, are they effective and do they cause harm? And I think one of the most interesting studies that sort of looked at this, they said, maybe people gain more weight from dieting, not because of dieting, but they're just genetically loaded to do that. So they took 2,000 twins, in other words, 4,000 people, and followed them for 5 years. And what they found is that dieting independent of genetics predicted weight gain in a dose response manner, the more that someone dieted. So that's the part that people have trouble wrapping their head around, because they're getting this message that you have to be a certain weight to be healthy, or that you can look at a person and know the state of their health, and you really can't. And so what's happening, there's a lot of fat shaming that's going on, and that's not healthy for the mind either. That creates a lot of stress. And so what we need to do is, first of all, realize that, when we are pre-adolescents, and especially with girls, we're going to gain a lot of weight, appropriately so, to help support the development of our bodies. I will never forget, this is a sad story. I saw a 12-year-old girl in my office, because at the age of 11, right at the end of her 6th grade, she went to her pediatrician, and the pediatrician said, "You are 1 pound away from obesity." Using those words, the parents were present, and that scared the bejeebers out of that kid, because there's so much weight stigma going on. And so what ended up happening is she fell into a horrible, horrible eating disorder. And by the time I saw her in the fall, it was like September, school had started, I was not able to work with her. I think I saw her once or twice. She just needed a higher level of care. That's the kind of damage that ends up happening when we have this kind of weight stigma. So there's like 2 issues: is how do we change the culture? How do we change the system? That's one of the issues. And then on a family level, okay, what do I do for my family? What do I do for my kids? And so part of what I like to really suggest is, and really endorse, this idea that all bodies deserve dignity and respect. And that includes how we talk about our bodies, that we don't talk about we don't compare our bodies, about how someone's body looks, and those types of things. And we don't also do that around food, like, oh my God, I was so bad for eating, and you fill in the blank of whatever the food is. And what's fascinating right now in our culture is looking at the amount of shaming that goes on around eating. It's like, oh my God, eating is one of the joys in life. Eating is supposed to be pleasurable. And now we're getting all judgy around that, as if it's a religion, as if you're violating a moral code. And honestly, unless you killed someone to get that food, guilt has place in eating. So instead, how can we help our families, our kids, and yourselves connect to your own body, where our body has the wisdom to figure this stuff out? But the more we start creating doubt and rules around eating, we create a bigger disconnect on what's going on in the body,
Yeah, I can see that. So if for parents who are listening saying, oh my gosh, I don't want this for my kids, I would love for you to share some of the principles. How can we help kids and then teens become more intuitive eaters? And then what does it mean to be an intuitive eater? What are some of those things?
Yeah, let's start with that, or even start with this idea of changing culture is daunting. It's like, oh my God, are you kidding me, Evelyn? But this idea that you can change the legacy of diet culture at your kitchen table, in your family, you can actually stop that. And when I talk to a lot of moms, especially, that gives them a lot of meaning, because it's like, oh my God, I don't want my kids to suffer the way I've been suffering, so we can stop the culture at our own kitchen tables. And so what that looks like, one of the first principles of intuitive eating is reject the diet mentality. And that includes diet culture and recognizing it and calling it out. And so if you're counting macros, that's an example of diet culture. If you're calling foods good or bad, that's an example. And again, this is not to judge you. It's just to start to recognize, oh, I think I might be doing some of those things. Like, okay, so let's see what we can do to start unlearning some of those aspects. And so ultimately what an intuitive eater is basically you're the expert of your own body. Intuitive eating is a self-care eating framework with 10 principles. And it's an interdynamic process, that includes rational thought, instinct and emotion. So we've got this ability, and what ends up happening is trust gets violated. So there was a really interesting study on kids, adolescent kids, and they asked this question: can we apply intuitive eating to kids? Does this assessment model work for them? And the answer was yes, but. And it made me sad what the but was. And the but was is that these kids felt in order to honor hunger and honor fullness and aim for satisfaction in eating, those are 3 principles, they needed to trust that their body works. And what's happening right now, there's so much fear mongering going on that it creates doubt. And so what parents can do is to help with this trust. That one model of eating I'm really a huge fan of, and then it's influenced our work a lot, is the work by Ellen Satter. She has the division of labor, or it's called eating competency. And that is the responsibility of the parents is to provide the food. You decide what you're going to have for dinner or snacks. And the responsibility of the child is how much they're going to eat, if at all. In other words, that you trust that their little cues can self-regulate. And it's really a beautiful thing. But where this gets tricky is if, as a parent, you doubt your own body, you're not sure about it. It's like, well, this might sound good for your readers, Evelyn. I love the idea, but I don't know. I think there's something broken about my body. And I know, and it makes me sad. And I hear these stories all the time because trust is missing. And so if a parent is missing trust, it gets a little harder to cultivate that for their kids. But I'll tell you where I've really seen it manifest, and it's really beautiful. These are for the young parents out there, or parents to be, and that is through the process of baby-led weaning. And it's basically intuitive eating for babies. Babies are the natural intuitive eater. And in fact, when we wrote intuitive eating, a lot of our models based on the work from kids, that kids naturally self-regulate. And there was this famous study published in the New England Journal of Medicine where the researchers said, it was a study on toddlers, and if you look at a kid's eating, it's a parent's worst nightmare. I'll never forget that. And they said, but if you look at a kid's eating over a week or two, it evens out. They naturally self-regulate. And so that part of the message is we need to get it out of the way. And what this particular research has shown, L.L. Birch, who's now retired, that the more we interfere with our kids' eating, the more we try and control their eating, the bigger of a problem it ends up creating. It ends up creating the very thing that you're trying not to have happen, where a kid becomes obsessed about a food that they can't have, and so on. So instead, we give them this autonomy is to self-regulate. You decide what's on the kitchen table, and they decide the how much. And so with baby-led weaning, what that is, for those that are not familiar, is when you're transitioning from breast milk, or if you're formula feeding, you're transitioning to solids, that instead of using, baby food where you're spoon feeding the baby, is that you're using whole foods cut up appropriate to the age of the baby. This usually starts around age 6 months, and the babies feed themselves. And I got to tell you, I was telling you earlier, I've got 2 grandbabies. One is only days old, but the other, she's now 2. And to watch her do this, my daughter would send me so many pictures and videos. I mean, my granddaughter would have food all over her face, food all over the floor. But ultimately, she was getting food in the mouth. And to watch your kid grow and to self-regulate like that, it's trust building for the parent as well. So it's really rather cool, but it also helps the development in terms of eye-hand coordination, all kinds of things. And there's actually, I'll go ahead and say it, there's an Instagram account that I highly recommend called Feeding Littles. I think they have almost 1 million followers now. And it's led by a team. It's a dietitian and an occupational therapist. And the dietitian is trained in intuitive eating. But all they do is they on their videos and their stories, they show all of these kids doing this baby-led weaning. And so their account is very helpful to watch. And so what I've seen that do for parents is it starts to cultivate trust. And I've also seen it with with older kids too. And so a story I like to tell was when my son was a toddler. He was like 2. And I don't know why, I have a very clear memory. I made a really good dinner. Like, I made all my favorite foods. That's probably why I remember. So it was like lasagna, I think a salad, and carrot cake. And the carrot cake homemade. And I served everyone the same amount, his sister and his dad and myself. And when he finished his cake, he says, "More, Mommy." And I have to tell you, the mommy in me was thinking, dude, you've had enough. That was an honest thought that I had, but I had to win some thought, thank goodness. And then and then the intuitive eater part of me, professionals, like, let the kid eat cake. So I cut him another same size piece, gave it to him. You know what he did? He ate one bite, done, mommy. He went off and played. So when you start to see these kinds of things over and over again, you start to realize, yeah, we have the ability to do this, And so the question is for your listeners out there is, what's one step maybe that they can take? You don't have to dive all in, but what's one step that you can take toward facilitating this autonomy in your kid? And what this ends up doing, it strengthens them as they grow up and start hearing all these fad diets and diet culture, that, your body has the truth within. What is your body telling you? It's a beautiful trust that we end up teaching. It's a gift we give to our kids and our family.
I did baby led weaning with my second daughter, and it was fabulous. It was wonderful. I remember like the big piece of steamed broccoli that she was just like mashing at her face, which was fabulous. Yeah, I loved it a lot. Well, I have one place I want to push back with you here. Although in every way, I agree in so many ways. Like when I got to trust my own body and ate more, it's just so much better. I feel like at this point in my life, I actually am the intuitive eater you talk about. But one thing, the place I want to push back on is, and I think about this like in the French culture, like, aren't there places where, like certain foods that are great for you, like broccoli or whatever, that, when kids are toddlers, they naturally have an aversion towards vegetables. And so in our house, we had a rule of, you don't have to eat it, but you must taste it to kind of help develop their palate of like just tasting all kinds of different foods. But we said, you can spit it out completely when you're done. Like, you're totally welcome to spit out completely. And we've seen, anecdotally in my own experience, that our kids are way more adventurous eaters than some other kids we've experienced. So what would you say to that piece?
Wasn't that awesome? Well, first of all, I pretty much agree with that. And so what you're talking about is exposure, and it can take up to 10 to 20 times of seeing a food and trying a food before a kid's going to embrace it. So again, as a parent, you can serve all the broccoli that you want, And so then the question is, maybe, and this is a very nuanced thing, do I force my kid to take a bite? And one of the things I like to really emphasize in the family eating dynamic is that eating should be a time when we all come together and not a source of stress, not the inquisition about what's going on with their homework, although when they're toddlers, you're not even doing that, And what happens is, what's really powerful is when they watch you eating the broccoli, when they watch dad eating the broccoli or whoever, that becomes part of it, and not getting into power struggles. But I completely agree, we need to have exposures to these foods. And if you get your kids involved in the cooking or the selection, one of the things my kids loved is when they go grocery shopping with me, it's like, okay, you get to pick the vegetables we're having tonight or for this week. And that gives them this power. Like, yeah, they get to pick what mom and dad and everyone's having, and they kind of just get into it. So part of it is, what is your own relationship with the food? And are you bringing stress to the table, or is it joy to the table, or something in between? And by the way, I don't want to imply any kind of perfectionism. Sometimes the best you can do is get the dinner on and then be done, and that's okay too. So I agree, we need to have these exposures. And sometimes when you're working with kids with picky eating, my assistant happens to work for an occupational therapist, and one of the things they do for exposure is something you were suggesting. And I'm not saying you do this at your own home, but they want the kids just to start touching the food. They start touching it with their hands. That's one exposure. And at some point they do a game called target practice, where they get this bullseye in a big plastic sheet, and they have the kids put the food in their mouth and then try to hit the target. And so it's a game that they love. Right? And so what it's doing is, it's getting them just to have it in their mouth, to have the experience of that. And I want to stress, I'm not saying you do this at the family table, but having this exposure is really helpful. Otherwise, you can end up reinforcing picky eating if all you do is serve the same two foods that Johnny likes. It kind of reinforces that. So I think we're in agreement on that for the most part.
And probably our own example. I mean, I know that kids obviously pick up on every single thing that we do, that we don't want them to pick up on, all our bad habits. So I think probably the way your work can come to parents in particular is probably some of the best things. And you talk about helping people regain satisfaction. And you also talk about, coping with emotions, and also regaining hunger. I mean, there's so much I could probably have a part 2 on this, but where do you think, and as we sort of have we allow time to wrap up for this. But what do you think, as you think about the scope of what you offer in the work that you do, are some of the most important principles to look at maybe first?
That's a really good question. So, it's funny. I never go in order with the principles, but when you write a book, you need to go in order. For yourself, for any adult, I like to start with aiming for satisfaction because it's so personal. Like, well, what does a satisfying meal taste like to you? What does a satisfying meal feel like to you? What kinds of conditions contribute to a satisfying meal? So imagine right now your favorite dinner, just your favorite dinner. Someone else makes it. That makes it part of my favorite, by the way, when someone else does the cooking. But now imagine that same favorite meal and you are in a fight with your husband or your partner. And are you going to enjoy it? Probably not. And I know that sounds like obvious. You don't want to be in a fight, but looking at all these different kinds of conditions. And because it's so personal, it helps you get connected. Is it satisfying to start a meal when you're in this place of what I call primal hunger? It's like, I'm so hungry, I'm going to eat you. Kind of hunger. And I would say usually not, because there's an urgency and intensity, like just give me the food, and there's a tendency to eat fast. Or is it more satisfying to start with kind of a pleasant or a gentle hunger? And when you finish, the level of fullness, ultimately it's not satisfying to feel too full, and it's not satisfying to undereat because you're hungry an hour again. So that's a beautiful place to start with that. But one of the things I like to stress with intuitive eating, I know we didn't have time to go into all 10 principles, but it is 10 principles. And the last principle is honor your health with gentle nutrition. So we are concerned with health and nutrition. We're both dietitians that wrote this book with master's degrees in nutrition science. So it's all dynamically integrated. And so what I say is that when someone is, when their relationship with food is fraught with anxiety, the focus needs to be on the healing of it. How can I heal my relationship with food? And when that's kind of in place, then we go more towards, okay, how can we honor our health with gentle nutrition? And this idea that our body doesn't punch a time clock. You don't suddenly get a nutrition deficiency over one day or 1 week's worth of eating. It's what's the pattern of eating that you're doing? And how can we make that kind of eating enjoyable and not not angst-ridden nor rigid. There's a way to integrate all of these things. And sometimes, because there's this misunderstanding that intuitive eating is all about a food party. If you go on Instagram and look at the hashtag intuitive eating, you see cupcakes and donuts and ding dongs, all these kinds of desserty things. And those are people celebrating the freedom with eating, and then yay. But there's still 9 other principles involved. So sometimes people have this misunderstanding that intuitive eating is a free-for-all, and that's what's going to happen to them. It's like, ooh, if I did that, I would never stop eating. And it's like, no, there's actually this this fascinating area of research called habituation. The more you're exposed to food, it takes away the excitement. You still like it, but it's not a big deal. And we've seen, with the coronavirus thing, with the shopping phenomenon, empty shelves in the grocery store. And now that food has the perception of scarcity, even though we know it's in the food supply, there's been a lot of stories on that. You see people focusing more on food and toilet paper for that matter, and hoarding it. And that's what happens from a dieting mindset, So there's so much to this.
Yeah, there is so much to this, Evelyn. We barely scratched the surface. I have this whole list of other things that I wanted to talk to you about. So I'm sure that I would invite the listener to check out Evelyn's work, check out intuitive eating if you're curious about this, because it seems to me the healthiest. I've never had anyone on the podcast to talk about or I've talked about maybe nutrition for families, but barely ever. This is something that we've touched on very rarely on this podcast. But I think that your work, and I just want to thank you for it, the work that you're doing to change people's minds and to help people to be more aware and sensitive and just knowing and understanding and living from their whole body is
Yes.
so valuable. I intuitively got all of these things that you said in so many ways, because this was like a process that I went through myself. I had some unhealthy eating habits, and then through the process of mindfulness and yoga and just being very embodied over the last 14 years and very having this awareness, I never ever eat more than I need to ever. But that was something I did as a younger person. And it was just, I don't think about that in many ways. And I just know how good that feels in my life. And I want that so much for all the listeners and everyone out there to have this thing. And you've broken it down so beautifully and so wisely. I really appreciate your work.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming on. Where can people find you? Where can they connect? What can they do to take their next steps?
Oh my gosh. So I'll start first. If you want to really start getting into the practice of it, there's a workbook called the Intuitive Eating Workbook. You might want to start there. If you'd rather start more with, you want to understand the research and the case studies, we have the 4th edition of Intuitive Eating coming out June 2020. You can get it on pre-order right now. I'm pretty active on Instagram. At Evelyn Tribole, and I post pretty exclusively, I'd say 98% on intuitive eating. And then there's our intuitiveeating.org website. So there's many resources out there. So come and visit me.
Come and visit Evelyn and remember her wonderful laugh when you do. Thank you so much for coming on the Mindful Mama podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. I love her perspective, and man, does she talk a lot. She got a lot in that short amount of time. My goodness, so cool. So I'm wondering what you're going to take away from this. I really want to know. I'm curious about your takeaways. Sometimes it's hard to go, I know, from the experience of listening to a podcast on your own to then jumping on your phone or your computer and reaching out to either the Facebook group or the Instagram and telling me what your experience was like. But I would really love it if you could. Those reach outs, they make such a big difference to me. And of course, if this episode has supported you in some way and you think it's going to support others, please share it. Take a screenshot of what you're listening to and you text it to your friends and let them know that this is a powerful episode. And then let me know. I want to know. I want to know too if you enjoyed it. And just a quick reminder that I will be opening a Mindful Mama transformation coaching group soon. If you would like to work with me for 5 months, be one of my VIPs and have a transformative experience of your experience as a mother, reach out to me. I would like to talk in person. Reach out to me at hunter@mindfulmamamentor.com. You can say it's about group coaching. All right, that's it, my friend. I am so grateful you are here listening. I have some amazing episodes coming up for you coming up. I hope that you're safe. I hope you're healthy and sound and keeping your feet on the ground these days. That's what we're hoping for. And I wish you lots of peace. Thanks so much for listening. Namaste. Are you a mom who wants to feel less stressed and enjoy motherhood more? Do you want to be calmer with your kids and be more present for life? I've gone from being stressed and yelling to become more grounded, more at ease, and have more enjoyable, cooperative relationships with my kids. I'm going to show you how to do it too. If you currently feel stuck or stagnant, this is for you. I've created a free, downloadable audio training, Mindfulness for Moms, the superpower you need. It will show you how to respond rather than react, how to let go of stress and feel more grounded in seconds, how to have a smoother day today and become more present for your kids. To get this absolutely free, simply visit the website mindfulmomguide.com. That's mindfulmomguide.com. Get started with mindfulness, the superpower moms need. I'll see you there.